Boker Tov, everyone. God willing, we should hear good news. This Parsha Shiur is dedicated to the memory of our dear friend, really one of the pillars of our congregation, Marvin Hirshhorn, Zichrono Livracha, to second yard site. You never saw Marvin without a book, without a sefer. And his loyalty to Torah and to his family and to the community really was legendary. So he's sorely missed. And he should be a Melis Yosher for everyone. And Yehi Zichro Baruch. This week's Parsha deals with Kohanim. Now, the Jewish people are a meritocracy. We don't care, allegedly at least, about yichus. There's a famous quip attributed to the Rebbe of Kotsk that a Jew came to him and bragged to him that he's a Rebbe Sheinikel. He's the grandson of a great Hasidic Rebbe. And the Kosker said, Esav was also the grandson of a great Rebbe. I don't care what your grandfather was, who are you? And everybody is judged on his own. The Torah says, Lo yomsu avos albonim ubonim alavoso. The sins of the fathers are not visited on the children. And before Shem say the merits also, except there's an exception. When it comes to merits, the Ribbono Shel Olam remembers for generations. But again, that doesn't define the person. The person is defined by one's own achievements, by one's own life. And the exception to all of this idea of a meritocracy, we find in the Talmud, for instance, that some of the greatest scholars were absolute poverty-stricken workmen, and some were aristocrats who lived in mansions. But from the Talmud, you can't tell who is who unless the Talmud tells you so specifically. So the Gemara, in fact, says, you should be careful how you treat. They're talking to their teachers, to the educational system. Be careful how you treat b'nei aniyim, those who are from the lower classes, financially. Shemahem teitzei Torah. Because out of these what relatively poor, inferior class people, the Torah comes forth from them. The Gemara tells us about the people in the Talmud that were so poor that they only had one garment, so that when his wife went out shopping, he had to stay home. And when he went out, so she had to stay home. Yet when it comes to the give and take, which exists within the Talmud and which is the basis for the development of Torah, and especially Torah Shebaal Peh, we don't see any of these differences. Nevertheless, the exception to all of these rules are the Kohanim. the Leviim to a certain extent, but not as much as the Kohanim. If you're from the family of Aaron, through the paternal side, and you're a Kohen, so then there are certain privileges that are bestowed only upon Kohanim. There are certain mitzvot, commandments, that only a Kohen can fulfill. And there are certain precepts that you're not allowed to violate, even though in other Jews, to them it is a commandment. For instance, Halvoyas Ames, going to a funeral. So to the ordinary Jew, to the Yisrael like me, so that's Eilid Dvorim, Shora Mochel Perosei, Bolam Hazeh, Karen Kayemet Lolo Mabo, one of the great mitzvahs, social mitzvah. A Kohen is prevented. The Nefesh Lo Yitamo Be'amov, not allowed to go. So the Kohanim have a special status. And it's interesting, over the thousands of years of Jewish life, that has remained constant. So that in temple times, for the almost millennia that we had temple, both the first Beis HaMikdash and the second, so then the Kohen had a specific job. He had to, so to speak, be employed in the service of the Beit HaMikdash. However, for the thousands of years that there has been no temple, so Kohen doesn't have any special job. Nevertheless, we preserve the kahuna. And we have customs to preserve the kahuna. The Kohen's entitled to the first aliyah to the Torah. The Kohen is entitled to lead the Birchat Hamazon. The Kohen has status. So it's interesting. I want to share with you some ideas that the Meforshim say. We look at the Kohanim, there was a DNA study that was done over the past decade, or maybe 2 decades, to try and see if there's a special marker in the DNA of the Kohanim that identify them as being a Kohen. Without diverting too much, one of the great subjects in halacha now that poskim have to deal with is DNA. Can we rely on DNA for certain things? For instance, paternity. You can determine, the civil court, they rely on it. In paternity suits to see who the father is, so the DNA tells you who the father is. Does that apply in halacha? There'll be questions of legitimacy of children. Can you solve it with DNA? So they did this experiment with Kohanim. I think the experiment, I think 3,000 Kohanim were involved in the experiment worldwide. And out of the Kohanim that were tested, so 38% had a certain marker that does not appear genetically in other Jews. Now, is that a significant number, 38%? What does it say about the 62% that don't have the marker? Are you a Kohen? You know, the old joke, I want to be a Kohen, right? My father was a Kohen, my grandfather's a Kohen, I also want to be a Kohen. If somebody comes here to shul and he tells the Gabbai, I'm a Kohen, do we say to him, let's see your birth certificate? Let's see your document from Beth Din that you're a Kohen. Do you have your, here in shul, we can ask you for a vaccination report, but we never ask anybody for a Kohen report. He says he's a Kohen, he's a Kohen. Is that legitimate? So, again, in our time, and the Mefarshim all say it, it's not that significant, because what does he do? He blesses the people, right? So an ordinary Jew can also bless the people. It's not a violation. In fact, we should always try to bless each other. So, so if he says he's a Kohen, he can go up and duchen. If he says the Kohen will give him the first aliyah, it's not lo no ra, right? And if he isn't the Kohen, so, but he had the aliyah, good. Or he led the Birchat Hamazon. None of that is critical. Unfortunately, even say regarding Pidyon Haben, the Minchas Chinuch discusses it. What about Jewish communities that nobody claims they're a Kohen? And they're supposed to be a Pidyon Haben. A woman gives birth to a firstborn son. So after 30 days, you're supposed to redeem the son, Pidyon Haben. There's no Kohen. And that's happened many, many times. There were Jews that lived in small communities and outlying communities. It's not like today where we have communications with everyone, etc. It's possible. No Kohen. So if there was no Kohen, so the Minchas Chinuch says, so the Israeli can be put in with the Israel. But that's the Pidyon Haben, okay. The question is whether he can keep the $5. But the etzem pidyon, the core of the matter, that there was a redemption, even without a Kohen. So therefore, being a Kohen has very little downside in our time, so to speak. Because a Kohen doesn't have to do anything. And he doesn't go to funerals. That's a good idea anyway. Funerals usually are depressing. He's limited naturally whom we can marry, but the limitations are not severe. So this entity of the kahuna is one of the great exceptions to the meritocracy principle which exists in Judaism. Because of this, let's look at how the foundation of the kunas began with Aaron HaKohen. So first of all, Moshe, according to the Medrash, Moshe is immediately troubled. The Rebbeinu Shalom says, Kach es Aaron v'ezbonav. Take Aaron and his 4 sons, and you will establish the guna with them. Moshe is very sensitive to nepotism because he knows, and that's exactly what happens later with Korach, that somebody will come and say, look at him, he took his brother. You wanted to give a fancy job. He wanted to give honor. He wanted them to have money. He gave them, So Moshe will say at the end of his life, I never took anything from them. I didn't take my expenses. They didn't pay for my donkey. I'm clean. So he's sensitive. They're going to take his brother and make his brother the Kohen. L'Avdol Elef Havdolos, when John Kennedy was elected president of the United States in 1960. So he appointed his brother to be the Attorney General, Robert Kennedy. And when the opposition howled that it was nepotism, he said, no, I just want to give him some experience before he becomes a lawyer. But nepotism exists. It's a fact of life. The president of the United States wants his son to make money. Every father wants his son to be successful. Moshe is very sensitive to it. And Moshe is so sensitive to it that the Rebbeinu Shalom has to command him. I'm telling you, take Aaron. Don't worry about it. I'm telling you what to do. And Aaron is even more sensitive. Rashi points out, and the Medrash points out, that Aaron is extremely reticent to accept the position. So there are reasons given why Aaron feels that way. One reason is, again, nepotism. He feels that the people will say, Moshe and Aaron, they divided up amongst themselves. But a second reason is Aaron was part of the story of the golden calf, the Egel Hazov. He says, how can I be the Kohen Gadol? How can I be the founder of the Kahuna? And because of me, thousands of Jews died, and the others worshipped idols, and the first tablets of the Torah were shattered because of me. How can I do that? Every time they look at me, they're not going to see me, they're going to see the broken stones. They're going to see what went wrong, not what went right, because that is the way we look at people, right? You can have somebody that 90% of his behavior is excellent, but there's certain things that are not. What do people remember about him? Not the 90%. They remember the things that were not. That's unfortunately how we judge people. Especially people in public life. I had a call yesterday from a wonderful young man who called me, and he said that he received a call from a certain community that they want him to be one of the candidates to be the rabbi in that community. They're looking now for a rabbi in that community, and they know him and they've heard him, and they think it would be a perfect fit. He should be willing to come and talk to them about it. So, and he called me like I should give him advice whether he should do it or not. I know many of the circumstances, but I don't know all the circumstances. So I said, what's your main hesitation? He said, my main hesitation is they have heard me speak 4 or 5 times because he has relatives in that town. So his parents, whenever he comes to that town, he speaks. They give him the guest slot to speak. And he said, and every time it's been a success. He says, but now if I come as a proposed candidate, and it happens that I will not speak well, it's possible. The greatest orator, you don't always hit a home run, present company excluded. You don't always, not every speech is the greatest. I met a man on the street a few months ago, and he said to me, Rabbi Wein, I was in the synagogue on Shabbat. I heard you speak. I didn't like what you said. I said, I didn't like it either, but I had to speak and you didn't. You have to speak even if you don't like what you're going to say. So he said, that's what I'm afraid of. So I told him, well, that's the rabbinate, you can't be afraid. You can do your best and that's it. If it goes, it doesn't go. It goes, it doesn't go. But we understand Aaron's reticence because they remember Aaron from the Egel. And it'll be compounded that his 2 sons are going to die. So the sons do things that are wrong. So how can he be the Kohen Gadol? He can't even raise his children right. Basic tenet not to bring foreign fire on the Ktoret, etc. They violated it. Rashi says even, the Medrash says even stronger. They said, Mosai Yamusu Skenim Alolu, when will our father and uncle pass away? And then we'll be in charge. Everything will be good. So he's the father of those 2 sons. So he has faults. And no one recognizes one's faults deep down as the person himself that has those faults. We all know our weaknesses. That's why we're able to cover them up, because we know them. So Aaron is very hesitant. He doesn't want it. And that's why it says, Kachas Aaron. You have to force him. Take him, Moshe. So there are 2 ways to take him. One is like Kachas Alaviv. Take him by telling him, Ashrecha, how fortunate you are that you're going to be a servant to the Jewish people. What an exalted role you're going to fulfill. So that's a positive way, if you can make him see it that way. That's what I told the young man about the rabbinate. If you see it that way, so then it's a great opportunity. If you see it that there's going to be people that are going to give you problems, which they will, and if it's really going to disturb your life, then it's not for you. Only you can judge that. So the Torah said, Kachas Aaron, take him, convince him, tell him how great it is. Let him see the whole picture. If he sees the whole picture, then he won't be so reticent. And that's how the kahuna was founded. It was founded not just with humility and modesty. He didn't take an ad in the paper and say, I'm appointed. Look what you're getting. So therefore, Aaron became the symbol. Oev Shalom, Verodev Shalom, Oev Asamokom, Oev Asabrios, Bekorvan La Torah. The Kahuna was low profile. Whatever the Kahuna was not low profile in Tanakh, then we see there were all those problems. The Chashmonaim were Kahanim, were not satisfied with being Kahanim and wanted to be the king as well. Eventually, the whole thing collapsed, including their family, etc. When the second temple is being built, so we're going to read in the Haftorah, and we read it in the Navi Yechezkel, and we read it in the Navi Zechariah, that somehow the Kohanim are again reticent. They are somehow not enthusiastic. In the Tanakh, it says, Al Kohanim v'Alevim b'nei Tzodok. Tzodok was the Kohen Gadol. Asher Shomru es Mishmarti, that they still guarded my tradition. B'ta'ot b'nei Yisrael me'olai. The Jewish people took a wrong turn. Most of the Jewish people went away. They intermarried. And we're going to see in a minute that the children of the Kohen Gadol of Yoshua, they also intermarried. So he's the grandfather of non-Jews. So he doesn't want to be the Kohen Gadol either. It says, Yoshua Yolavush begodim tzoim. The Kohen Gadol was wearing stained garments. The Gemara says, what does it mean, stained garments? That his children married outside of the faith. They married non-Jewish women. That was the exile. That's always the exile. So Yoshua doesn't want to be the Kohen Gadol. He's embarrassed. Said, well, every time they look at me, they're going to say, look at that. Look at his family. He couldn't even raise his sons. And yet the Navi says, you have no choice. We take you to be the Kohen Gadol. We're going to rebuild the second temple with you. So again, it begins with reticence, with imperfection, so to speak, with failure on levels that we would consider to be failures. And yet, that's not how heaven sees it. And he sees him as the founding Kohen Gadol of the Bayou Sheni. For 420 years, he and his family are going to be the high priests of Israel. They're going to be the caretakers of the faith. So that's a remarkable view of the Kohen. We don't look at our Kohanim to be perfect people. That's what the Torah is teaching us. We're not looking for perfection. In fact, we're looking for people who can be embarrassed. We're looking for people who know what shame is, who know what failure is. I I had a man that I knew in Muncie. When I knew him, he was a multimillionaire. He once told me, he said, this is the 5th business that I am in. The first 4 went bankrupt. He said, only because they went bankrupt did I finally figure out what I had to do. If I would have been a success with the first business, he said, I would have made a living, but I wouldn't have what I have today. The fact that I failed taught me a lesson. I had to be taught lessons 4 times. But when I finally learned the lesson, I was able to be very successful. I don't advocate going bankrupt. And I don't advocate people being a failure. But life is such that not everything works out the way we want it to work out. There's no one that does not know disappointment, frustration. Depends on what level, but it's common to life. That's what a Kohen has to have, because then the Kohen can lead the people. If the Kohen himself never had frustration, he cannot do anything for the people. He can't empathize with them. He can't feel their pain. He can't give them good advice, because I remember when I was in law school, so it's always the luck of the draw. So in our class, there was someone that was an absolute raving genius. His name was not Berline. And he knew every case by heart. And he knew the logic. He knew had a photographic memory. He was it, wonderful. The rest of us, to varying degree, I mean, there was no one there that was really, mentally handicapped. They were in law school, and he had to get in. But we didn't get every case right. We didn't remember every opinion. We couldn't quote verbatim every decision of the Supreme Court. And when it came time to study for the bar exam, so there were those who wanted to study with this young man because he knew everything. And they figured he would know the bar exam stone cold. But there were those like me who did not want to study with him because he couldn't appreciate what our difficulty would be to prepare for the bar exam. And therefore he wasn't relevant to us. Couldn't do it. He ended up being one of the 36 lawyers for the Atomic Energy Commission in the United States. But there was only 36 lawyers that could do that, because you had to know physics. It was an impossible discipline. But that's the lesson. Do you want to be the Kohen? You're perfect. We don't need you. We don't want you. You're not going to be able to do it. We need people that have absorbed the blows of life. And that's why it says, Kisif Kohen Yishmru Das, the Torah Yavakshu Mipiyu. The Kohen will guard the knowledge that the Torah gives us, and he'll spread it to others. Ki malach Hashem tzvokosu, he's an angel of God. He is given over the task of being the angel. That's how he has to see himself. And he should not be deterred by the fact that somehow he has imperfections. So we see that throughout the story of the kahuna. It's a great lesson. And we hope now that when eventually the bayis will be rebuilt again, and the Kohanim ba'avodosam, the Kohen will again serve in the temple, it will be in the tradition of Aaron and Yoshua. And it may not be the perfect person, but we're not looking for that. We're looking for the one that sees the great picture of the service of God and of the Jewish people. So have a wonderful Shabbat, everyone. We have a guest Rav this Shabbos in Shul. If you're in the area, please come and partake. Shabbat Shalom.
There wasn't any affirmative action?
Huh?
There wasn't any affirmative action then?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you.
No affirmative action.
Thank you for your hard work you did for the Kila. I see it just my little bit here. Amazing.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.